If you're brand new to tennis and you've been looking into getting yourself a brand new racket, you may have noticed that some of them are about or above $300. And then you think to yourself, do I actually need to play this sport? And the thing is, you don't have to worry because you can find a very similar quality racket for about half of the price, especially if you're a beginner. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Brody Taylor. I've been working in a tennis retail store for the past 8+ years, as well as I do have my MRT certification, which is essentially a fancy way of saying I took a test here in the United States over racket technology, string technology, how they work together, and how that's going to affect you playing with it. So I feel very confident and comfortable talking about this, especially since I've fitted so many people over the many years with these kinds of rackets before. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a few of the major brands of tennis racket manufacturers that are out today and show you a few different, more budget-friendly options that they have rather than going for the big, expensive $300 plus racket, which at this stage, especially if you're a beginner, you probably don't need because you're not necessarily going to know how this is going to help you since you're still learning and developing your play style overall. So the first brand that we're going to be talking about is the brand known as Babolat. Now the thing is, if you want to actually pronounce Babolat correctly, because they are a French company, it is technically pronounced Babolat. You don't pronounce the T. However, I did not grow up learning it like that, so I still pronounce it Babolat. I'm sorry for all of the Babolat people that may watch these. However, Babolat essentially has two lines that you can think of. One of them is known as the Boost line. The other one is known as the Evo line. So when we're talking about Babolat rackets and comparing them with the Babolat Boost and the Babolat Evo, as well as just any of the rackets we're going to mention in this video, I like to think of these in terms of steps to get to the highest quality of racket from that manufacturer. So if we say use the Babolat Pure Drive as our example, as like top tier quality from Babolat, it's like great. That's our one we're trying to get to. What in terms of steps down are the Babolat Boost line and the Babolat Evo line. And the way that I like to think about it is that the Babolat Pure Drive up at the top, then you have the Babolat Evos, and then you have the Babolat Boosts. So the Evos, because they are one step below the Babolat Pure Drive, these ones are going to be a little bit more expensive compared to the Babolat Boosts. However, they are going to last a little bit longer, they're going to play a little bit better, and they're going to have a little bit more of the higher quality materials in it to make sure that the racket is going to be a little bit easier on your arm, not have tennis elbow or not cause tennis elbow as much, and just be a little bit more of a overall better racket. But if you still want to go more budget friendly, Babolat does still have the Boost option of rackets for you to make sure that you do get something that will work for you and that is going to allow you to continue to play the sport, kind of get an idea for what the two steps above being the Babolat Pure Drive, kind of get an idea for how that's going to feel, but still be a little bit further away because you are going for that more budget-friendly price point. None of them are going to be absolutely terrible or bad rackets. They're just going to be different steps to get to that highest tier quality, the above $300 or like I think it's 79 plus. Now, going outside of Babolat, we are then going to move on to Wilson. Also, one of the big three tennis racket brands that are out there. Wilson's big line, in my opinion, is known as the Wilson Burn. Now, the Burn does have a couple of different options to choose from, whether it be for weight or string pattern, and I'll explain why here in a second. Same thinking along the lines of the Babolat rackets with the Wilson racket. The big thing about the Wilson Burn is the fact that the Burn in itself was actually one of Wilson's main line of rackets until a few years ago when they first introduced the Wilson Shift. The Shift essentially replaced the Burn as their spin racket. I personally don't necessarily think the Shift should have done that. I think maybe they could have made its own silo for it, but that's what they did. So us as the consumer, we can benefit because the burn is not nearly as expensive as the Wilson Shift or the Wilson Blade, the Pro Staff, Ultra, or anything like that. We are typically looking at about $189 to $169 depending on the version of the burn that you get. And the reason I like the burn so much is because it is very helpful in generating spin, and it's very helpful in generating power, especially if you get the burn that is known as the Burn 100S or the LS or the ULS. Any of the burn rackets that have that S in the name are going to have a different string pattern, which is known as an 18 by 16 string pattern, which is going to help increase the amount of spin, increase the amount of power, and just be a very good way to help learn about topspin if that's something you're trying to learn or if your coach is trying to teach you. The one drawback to the Wilson burns is the fact that they do tend to break string a little bit quicker because of that 18 by 16 string pattern. So that is something to be mindful of. However, if you're just starting out, you probably aren't going to be breaking string that quickly. That would be my guess, unless you're just progressing at an insane level. And at that point, depending on how old you are and how long you've been playing or how well your technique is, you may want to go to a different type of string that maybe lasts longer than what you're currently using in that Wilson burn. Now, after we go from Wilson, we then have Head. So like Babolat, Head actually has two different racket lines that we can think of here. One of them, for me, I personally like the better of the two, are the XT Speed and Radical, both the S and the MP models. If you don't want to go with one of those, you can also look at the Instinct line from them as well. Now, moving on to Head's tennis rackets that we can get for a much nicer budget-friendly discount. The thing about these next ones, the XT Speed and Radical, the S and the MP, these are not like steps below, these are like adjacent. And the reason I say that is because the XT Speed and the XT Radical, these are the exact same models of the Speed and Radical that were released as the brand new versions a few generations back. So you're essentially getting the exact same racket you would have gotten when these were brand new and the latest and greatest models. You're just getting them for half the price. I'm pretty sure the Speed and the Radical, both the S and the MP models, I think the MPs are $109 brand new on sale, and the S's are $99 brand new, instead of when they were originally $179 and $189. I think those do tend to work very well if you are someone that's wanting a little bit more of a help from the racket, or you want the racket to be a little bit lighter. That's where the S versions of the rackets come in. They do tend to be lighter. And then the MPs are more for the players who are a little bit stronger. They've been playing for a little bit while, and they can handle a little bit more of a beefy racket, because those are going to be much heavier. Now, if you are wanting a little bit more help with control, then I would say go to the Radical MP, because that's a 98 head size, whereas the Speed is a 100 head size, so it's a little bit more all-around friendly. And if you're starting out, I would probably lean a little bit more towards the Speed if you're going for the MPs. If you're going for the S's, then that's where I would probably lean towards the Radical, because the Radical S is a 102 square inch head size rather than the Speed S, which is a 100 square inch head size. So the Radical is going to be a little bit easier for you to generate power with, and it's going to give you a little bit more extra help with reach. The Speed is just going to stay the consistent 100 head size, which is pretty common for most rackets nowadays, besides the 98, which is more of the control-oriented head size, as well as the more advanced head size. Then, if you don't want to do one of those, the other one you can look at is the Instinct line. The Instinct, again, kind of like the Burn, this was Head's power racket instead of the spin racket like the Burn, because the Instinct was very powerful. It was a very thick beam, or the racket itself was very thick when you looked at it, and it actually returned a lot of power to the ball. However, it was replaced by the Head Boom line of tennis rackets in order to change up the power line. However, because they made the booms, but they still make the instincts are not nearly as expensive as the booms, the head gravities, the new head radicals, the new head speeds. So you can probably get these for either, if not at a discount, less than you would for the normal head speeds, because most of the newer head rackets are typically above that $300 price tag, especially if you're looking at the Pro or the MP version. If you go with the lighter weight versions, you're probably looking at a little bit more towards like $269 or $289. However, you just get the Instinct or one of those XT rackets. If you look at the XT rackets, you could get 2 of them for the price of 1 brand new head racket. So much more budget friendly. And then of the other big one between these 3, the next brand we're going to be talking about is called Yonx. So Yonx, that one, if you're looking for these more cheap options that are still going to hold up well for you, the more expensive ones, those are going to be now called the Alphas, which are predominantly only in the E-Zone line of rackets. Or if you want something that's going to be a little bit more budget friendly, then we go to the game/feel versions of these rackets. Another one you may also see sometimes is the Ace. That one also works out fine as well, especially since we're not trying to spend an extreme amount of money for a racket that will last us quite a bit of time. As we head on over to the land of the Japanese with the Yonx tennis rackets, the big difference between the Yonx main line of tennis rackets and then the Aces, the Alphas, the Games, the Feels, is that the main line of tennis rackets, the ones that are typically more expensive, they are made in Japan, where Yonx is based out of. Now, the other ones, they are made in China. The reason that this is so specific and so important that I'm bringing it up is the fact that the Yonx rackets made in Japan, the high quality ones, those go through a very meticulous and very rigorous quality control check system, which has 50 different human touch points on it to make sure that the rackets are correct and ready to go before they ever ship out to you, the consumer. And that's where all of the ones made in China, they don't have that same rigorous testing, and it is going to be a little bit more variance in what the racket may say when you actually play with it. So take that with a grain of salt when looking into these. However, if you look at it, we have top rackets being the E-Zone, V-Core, Percept, and then right below that, I would say we have the Alphas. Those are the newest rackets that Yonx has just come out with. I think they are only in the E-Zone line currently, but they are said to be the one step down version of the actual E-Zone itself. Then after that, they've had the E-Zone Game, the E-Zone Ace, the E-Zone Feel. They've had that. They've had the V-Core Ace Feel Game before. So those, I would say, are more like either a half step down from the Alphas or like alpha adjacent to it, because they have had those for a while and they are going to work as well, especially if you're starting out or you want something very light. The Ace, Feel, and Game are all very lighter weight oriented rackets. So if you're someone that maybe doesn't want a very hefty racket, or you don't want something that's going to be extremely hard to swing, then that's where the Ace, Game, and Feel come in. The Alpha may be in there as well. However, it is going to be a little bit different in terms of, I think they do tend to gravitate towards the heavier side rather than the lighter side. But if you are wanting to try some of these, then most racket manufacturers or racket sellers, I would think, have demos. I know for these rackets we've talked about, the Alpha is typically one that has a demo. It's just not as common to be requested. The Babolat Evos do tend to have demos. The Head Instincts do, the XTs, because those are older, they typically do not have demos. And then the Wilson Burns also do have demos, which is going to be a great way to test these rackets, try them out before you actually buy them to see if they even work for your game and don't cause you any problems or with like tennis elbow or cause the ball to be flying and sailing on you. before you fully commit to these. So that way you don't have to waste all the time and waste all the money by just buying a brand new racket, playing with it, figuring out that you don't actually like it, and then you kind of get stuck with it because now that you played with it, you can't return it, which is a very common policy with a lot of racket sellers. So that's about it for Yonx. And then finally, the one that is going to be a little bit more shocking is going to be actually from Technafiber, of all places. So the Technafibers, there's two actual rackets. It's not two lines like with Babolat where you have the Boost line or the Evo line. The Technafiber rackets are actually going to be called the T-Fits. And there's two different versions of them. So finally, the Technafibers. So the big thing about the Technafibers and the T-Fits that I wrote down is that there's going to be two of them. One of them is the T-Fit 265 Storm. The other is the T-Fit 280 Power. Now, both of these rackets are going to come in weight-wise under 10 ounces strung. So I think that these tend to work very well for beginner adults who are not wanting a racket that's going to be extremely hefty or very hard for them to swing through the air, or for a junior player who's transitioning into their first adult racket. These are going to be very easy to swing with. These are going to be very easy to generate power and spin because one, the Power 280, that is going to be a 100 square inch head size with a 16 by 19 string pattern, which is pretty common and pretty much standard across most racket manufacturers for the racket that they'll make. And then the T-Fit Storm 265, that one is going to be a slightly bigger head size like the Radical S that I mentioned earlier, as well as 9.3 ounces strung. So probably the lightest racket, or one of the lightest rackets that I've talked about this entire video. So those I think are also great options to look into, especially because I think those are also going to be the most inexpensive that I've mentioned as well. They typically come in at a sale price of about $74, $75 when they're on sale, and that's still brand new because I think normally they're about $120 or $110 brand new. So in terms of the Technafiber step chart, if the new Technafiber T-Fights, the new Technafiber TF40s, and the TFX1 are the top of the line, then the T-Fits are probably about like 2 steps below that. That's why you get a much more reduced priced and typically just a little bit of a lower quality racket, but you're going to get the most budget friendly or cost effective one, in my opinion, from them. So with that being said, those are the rackets that I think would be wise to look into. As I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, if you are wanting to try any of these or you're thinking about getting one, definitely be sure to give a demo first if you can, just to make sure that you don't get stuck with something that you are not going to end up liking or anything like that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got. If you liked the video, leave a like on it. Comment down below any questions you have about the rackets, or if you've got to use some of these before, I'd love to know what your ideas and thoughts were when you were playing with them, as well as let me know if you guys are liking this format. I wanted to try something different with the way that the camera angles were and just moving back and forth between the whiteboard and me. So let me know what's going on. It did take me a while to kind of figure this out, so I apologize for the delay in getting some uploads. However, we will be back. We will be uploading more, and so I just wanted to thank you for your patience. Now, if you like the video, leave a like on it, comment down below any questions you have. Like I said, subscribe to the channel so we can grow this channel, get this information out there from the people that have it to the people that need it, and as always, take care.